Thoreau's attitude about science, what we now call science, and in fact Thoreau himself called science, and Thoreau had a different attitude about something he called natural history, or on occasion he called it natural philosophy. And Thoreau's attitude about science, well, he generally was antithetical to science, generally. I think this example will give you some idea of what I'm talking about. In 1853, March of 1853, he received a letter from Spencer Baird. Spencer or Spencerton? Spencer, right? Spencer Baird. Yeah. Oh, here it is, Spencer Fullerton Baird. That's why I keep getting messed up. In March of 1853. And that early in March of 53, and Thoreau wrote in his journal that evening when he had obviously been thinking about this, getting this letter. And here's what he writes in his journal. Baird was the secretary of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. The secretary of the Association for the Advancement of Science requested me by a printed circular letter from Washington the other day to fill the blanks against certain questions, among which the most important one was what branch of science I was specially interested in, using the term science in the most comprehensive sense possible. Now, though I could state to a select few that Department of Human Inquiry which engages me, which engages me and should rejoice at an opportunity so to do, I felt that it would be to make myself the laughing stock of the scientific community to describe or attempt to describe to them that branch of science which specifically interests me, inasmuch as they do not believe in a science which deals with the higher law.
Higher law would have a particular historic context in this sense. It was often used in the slavery debate, for instance, with Seward talking about the higher law, the laws of conscience, as opposed to the constitutional law. So that's, in a sense, that's the kind of a context for what Thoreau means about a higher law.
So I was obliged to speak to their condition and describe to them that poor part of me which alone they can understand. The fact is, I am a mystic, a transcendentalist, and a natural philosopher to boot. Now I think of it, I should have told them at once that I was a transcendentalist. That would have been the shortest way of telling them that they would not understand my explanation.
Thoreau, after seeing phosphorescent wood in the night. A scientific explanation, as it is called, would have been altogether out of place there. That is for pale daylight. Science with its retorts would have put me to sleep. It was the opportunity to be ignorant that I improved. It suggested to me that there was something to be seen if one had eyes. It made a believer of me more than before. I was prepared after this to hear of the most startling and unimagined phenomena witnessed by his folks. They are abroad at all hours and seasons in scenes so unfrequented by white men. Nature must have made 1,000 revelations to them, which are still secrets to us. The same experience always gives birth to the same sort of belief or religion. One revelation has been made to the Indian, another to the white man. I have much to learn of the Indian, nothing of the missionary. I am not sure, but all that would tempt me to teach the Indian my religion would be his promise to teach me his. Where is all your knowledge gone to? It evaporates completely, for it has no depth. The Allagash and East Branch, the Maine Woods.
I don't know why. I think it's a fascinating thing, but he wrote this in early March 1853. That's when he got the letter. He did not send the form back, for some reason I can't understand, until the 19th of December 1853, which is, what is that, about 10 months later? Poor correspondent, I suppose. But remember he says here that he was obliged to speak to their condition and describe to them that poor part of me which alone they can understand. Here's what he wrote in branches of science in which a special interest is felt. Thoreau wrote, "The manners and customs of the Indians of the Algonquin group previous to contact with the civilized man." I read this to Ed Wilson one time, and he couldn't believe it. He said, "What do you mean? Thoreau he wasn't an ethnologist at all." Well, in fact, he was. Nobody knows about it yet, but
Thoreau is primarily regarded as a botanist, biologist, someone who's interested in nature, not in human beings, not in ethnology. But in fact, from a scientific point of view, that was his primary interest. And I think it's important to understand that for Thoreau, scientifically, this is the distinction that he would make, the object of science is to get rid of subjectivity. Thoreau, when he wanted to know flowers, apples, and the botanical world, wanted to have a subjective response to those. as well as an objective, study them objectively. But when it came to Native Americans, he wanted to know objectively what were Native Americans like, not what he thought they might be like, not his preconceptions, but to try to wipe those preconceptions away to find out the way they actually were. And that effort to discover Native American cultures objectively is evidenced very clearly throughout his notebooks.
And I think what Thoreau means here is, again, it hinges on this notion of science as opposed to natural history. Thoreau obviously was interested in pumpkins and pine cones and fishes and all kinds of things, but he wasn't related, or he was interested in them as natural history, not as science. And what I mean is that in natural history, for Thoreau, is an attempt on Thoreau's part to get to know what he called the infinite extent of his relations to a particular, for instance, a pine cone. He wanted to know the literal history. How did the Indians use them? How did the Greeks use them? How do chipmunks use them? How do squirrels use them? How do you name the various parts of the pine tree and so on? What do they taste like? What do pine seeds taste like? Those sorts of things. It's very subjective as well as objective, whereas with the Native Americans, he was studying the Algonquins to try to get a very clear, more objective sense of the way the Native Americans lived before contact with the whites.